Okay, today we are going to be looking at investigation 1.3 from Let's Be Rational. We are going to talk about strategies for adding and subtracting fractions. All right, so in our book we are going to be discussing the Tupelo Township. And this is just a township where the town is divided into sections, and each section is 1 mile long and is about 640 acres of land. And so what has happened in their township after they founded it was that the owners of the section have bought and sold land so that each section is owned by several owners. And we can use number sentences to find out how much each person has. If a farmer owns 2 acres of land and buys another 1.5 acres of land, she will have 2 plus 1.5 or 3.5 acres of land. The number sentence that shows this relationship is 2 plus 1.5 equals 3.5. The sum of the parts of is the total land that the farmer owns, 3.5 acres. If a farmer owns 2.5 acres of land and then sells 1/2 acre of land, she will own 2.5 minus 1/2 or 2 acres of land. And that number sentence is right here. 2.5 minus 1/2 equals 2. And the difference is the land that the farmer still owns, which is 2 acres. All right, so let's move in to the actual problem. So right here, we are going to be working with the Tupelo Township, and part of what you need to do tonight is to get this copied into your spiral, okay, because we're going to be working with equivalent fractions and whatnot. So who owns the most land in section 18 and in section 19? Well, we're going to have to figure that out. So what I have done is I have this blown up a little bit bigger, and we are going to take a look at that so that we can draw lines and make concessions where we need to. Okay, so here is the blown up section. I'll scroll up a little bit so we can see section 18 and 19 up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to use the lines that are already here to divide this up. So looking at Lapp's section here, if I extended this line down through Stewart's all the way down, okay, here, and all the way up, and then did the same thing here, I have that Lapp owns 1/4 of the section. Okay, but these other farmers own less than that. So we're going to take a look there. So that's 1/4. And then I'm going to use this guy right here, Bach, and I'm going to use his lines to help cut a section over here, because this would also be 1/4. But if I use his lines of his box, I see that his little box is 1/4 of 1/4. Well, if I cut a 1/4 into 4, if I did that for each one of these, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4 times 4, which would be 16. So Bach owns 1/16 of the land. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to look over here at Wong, and Wong owns 1/16 of the land, plus he owns this part down here. Well, if I use Krebs' line and I cut this in half, I now have half of a 16th, which would be 1/32. Well, if I make these equivalent fractions, my 1/16 is really like 2/32. So we're going to make this an equivalent fraction. Instead of saying 1/16, I just erased a whole bunch of my work. I now have 2/32 plus 1/32, and that equals 3/32. Okay, so Wong now has 3/32. That would mean that Krebs has 1/32, because these 2/32 would equal a 16th. All right, so I'm going to get rid of part of a line here. Okay, but at the same time, that part that I just erased, make that red again. Okay, that also kind of chop this in, and this side looks like 1/32, and this side looks like 1/16. So if I write equivalent fractions, this would be 2/32 here plus 1/32 here, And then Stewart also has this part of it down here, and this also is 1/4 of 1/4, so it would be worth 2/32 or 1/16. And if I add all of these up for Stewart, Stewart is going to have 5/32 for Stewart. Okay, so I'm going to kind of clean this up a little bit and get rid of these smaller fractions here. But notice how I'm making everything equivalent. Okay, and so we'll get rid of this little line here so that we can see Wong's entire piece. And we'll get rid of this line here so we can see Stewart's entire piece. All right, going on. So Stewart comes here, and then we have these lines here that outline Stewart's line, and from Gardella. And Gardella looks like they have, if we followed these lines down, he looks like he would have 3/4 of a 4th. Well, we already know that 1/4 of a 4th would be a 16th, so that Gardella would have 3 of those. He would have, or she would have 3/16. Okay, and then we come over here to Fuentes, and Fuentes has a little section that looks very similar to Bach, and so his section is also 1/16. Okay, and then we have Mr. Fritz. Mr. Fritz, right here, would have a 1/32, and then if we take this line here, he would have 1/16 and 1/16. So this would be 2/32, okay, the equivalent fractions. All right, and if I get rid of the 1/16, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 32. So I'm going to rewrite all of Mr. Fritz's land into a fraction of 5/32. Okay, so we have all of this. All right, now we have Foley, Berg, and Walker, and Tooley. All right, and we're going to do the same thing as we did earlier. We're going to divide these sections up using the pre-existing lines. So if I look here, this was Lapp's 4th, and if I take Foley's and I cut his into 4th, right here on these lines, okay, I'm going to get similar things. So he's got 1/4 plus a 16th. Okay, so this right here would be 4/16 plus 1/16, and that would give us 5/16 of land. All right, so what I want you to try real quick, and go ahead and pause the video, is I want you to try to figure out the rest of Berg's, Walker's, and Tooley's land segments. All right, go ahead and pause and get those down, and then restart the video to check your answer. All right, so we see that Berg has 3/16 of the land. Walker has 5/16, and Tooley has 3/16. All right, so we're going to move on and see what is going to transpire here. All right, so as I turn the page, I see that question A says, what fraction of each section does each person own, and how we know? And then there's some things to do. Well, back here, we cut this problem up by dividing everything up into pieces based on other people's parts. And so we also had number sentences. And in our number sentences, we made sure that our fractions were equivalent. So in this one, 4/16 plus 1/16, we changed 1/4 to the 4/16 because when we add or subtract fractions, we have to have denominators that are the same. We have to have what we call a common denominator. All right, so what I want you to do before coming to class tomorrow is to essentially finish A in your spiral. And so what we really need you to do is to copy down the sections here, because the rest of our questions deal with the Tupelo Township and the fractions that each person owns. So it's going to be really important to have these down in your spiral.